This is the second um, workshop. So last week we did our kind of intro, just getting familiar with the Figma interface and some basics of design, like adding shapes or colors or text. Today we're gonna do some more kind of intermediate stuff, kind of leveling up what we can do, building things that look a little bit cooler and better. And then next week, also Wednesday at 11 a.m., we'll kind of bring it to life through some animation and some prototyping techniques. So the kind of three things that are our main goals for today, we're gonna build a light and dark theme icon, which will, if it's actually a developed website, you would click on it and it would switch the color scheme between the light colors and the dark colors. We're just going to be designing both of the sun and the moon icons here. We're also going to make a reusable project card. You've probably seen a lot of websites out there that looks like each thing's in these little cards that are placed in different places. We're going to be making one for like a mock portfolio website with a project, and we'll be using some pretty complex tools to do that, but we'll take it pretty slow to make sure that we're all on the same page. And then we'll cover a little bit about responsive design. Using some auto layout and constraints. Responsive design is just the process of designing your website or whatever you're doing to make sure that it looks good on any sort of screen, whether that's a laptop, whether that's a big TV, whether that's a small phone. And so that's just making sure that your design is tailored to kind of all different screen sizes. Cool. Awesome. So I have this link here if you want to type it into your browser of choice. I also wrote it on the whiteboard up here as well. This is going to be our starting file so that we all start with the same thing. We don't have to build a bunch of stuff together. Okay. So if you type that link in, also on the whiteboard, if you need, you'll see this file. You might get a little thing from Bitly that says like, we can't verify where you're going. It's fine, you're just going to Figma. Okay. Did we all get here? Cool. And so this is a file that I published to that Figma community that I showed last week. And to create your own version, you just click this Open in Figma button right here. And then you get a new tab with this kind of design that I started. We're using the same one that we did last semester. Okay. Were we all able to do that or feel comfortable that we're going to be able to do it if we haven't? Yes. If you type in bit.ly/s25 Figma 2. Okay, cool. All right, sounds good. All right. So just a little overview of our starting file. It's a very basic file. All of the things that I've put in here are things that you learned how to do last week. If you weren't here last week, I did record it and post it on the Digital Lounge website. But we can see that we have a kind of navigation section up here, this kind of what's called a hero section. It's just the top part of an introduction. We have like an about us, some projects, a resume section, if this was like a portfolio, contact me, and then we have our navigation down here as well. All right, and for those who just joined, if you want to get access to the starting file, just type that URL on the whiteboard into your browser. And then when you get to that community file that I published, you just click open in Figma and you'll get this yourself. Cool. I do have a bunch of styles over here that have been set up. So the text ones, the colors, and this layout grid. For today, we probably don't need the layout grid right now. So I'm gonna hover over where it says grid, click on my customization sliders to edit, and then I'm going to just click the eye icon for both of these to toggle them off, but they're still there if I want to turn them back on. All right, so we're gonna make our kind of sun/moon icon to kind of toggle over here. So if you want to do Command or Control plus to just zoom in a little bit, and I'm gonna go one more in even, and then if you you'll probably zoom into a place that's not exactly where you want to be. So if you hold down the space bar and then you click and drag, you're just going to move around your document. You're not moving any of the actual items, you're kind of moving like your camera over. And so just find like a good kind of empty space. So last week we worked mostly with just adding rectangles, but now we're going to add a different shape. We're going to make a sun, which is more of like a circle. And so all of our shape tools are underneath here where our rectangle is. So if you click on this arrow, you'll see these other shape tools that are right here. And you can use the ellipse for this. You can also press O on your keyboard. Now, very similar to the rectangles, you can click and drag to do a kind of a size like that. Or if you have it activated, you can just click and it'll give you a perfect 100 by 100 circle. Now, over here in our layout, we can see that its width is 100 pixels and its height is 100 pixels. And because I want this to stay a perfect circle, no matter what, I can click on this button to the very right where I can lock the aspect ratio. And the aspect ratio is just basically what's the relationship between your width and your height. And because these are equal, this now means whenever I move to try to resize my circle, it'll always stay a perfect circle, no matter what. I can even include the number over here. So if I change where my width is, if I put in 50, so 50, and I hit enter, it'll automatically apply it to the height as well. All right. So all pretty basic stuff so far. Let's learn the first kind of newish thing. So if you hover over your circle, and I'm actually going to zoom in slightly more just so it's easier to see, you can see this circle on the right side of our circle. And if you hover over it, it'll say it's the arc. So this is what is called the arc tool. And if you click and you move it, you'll notice you start to get kind of like a Pac-Man shape. You're just kind of cutting into your circle. Okay, so you have it selected, you hover over, you click and you can drag. So the thing that you're initially changing is what's called the sweep, and you'll see that percentage in like wherever my cursor kind of is. And this is just the amount of space that's open. And so let's do, if I let go of that, you'll notice that there's a new circle right here. This just brings me back my sweep. There's a different circle over here, right? And this is the start. So as we click and drag this, it can rotate around, right? So that's your rotate. And then now we have this ratio in the middle. And this allows you to change how much is cut from the center, okay? Does that all make sense? Okay. So you can get some crazy things if you move it over here too. Because then it's like in this weird space, but then you can go here, just play around with it to get used to it. All right. So let's do our ratio somewhere around like 85%. If you want to get exact, you'll notice that I have settings over here now too. So as I started using that arc tool, my circle now in its appearance section has these additional settings. So I can just change the ratio to, let's say 85, which is the one on the far right. And the center one, the sweep, I'm going to set it back to 100. And that gives me this kind of perfect circle that's cut out in the middle. Okay, cool. So this is going to be kind of like a border around our sun and our moon that we're going to make. So now I'm going to hold down Option on my keyboard. If you're using Windows, you hold down Alt. And then I'm just going to click and drag to make a duplicate of this. And so now we'll have one for our sun and one for our moon. All right. So as we're making our sun icon, we can probably make that with some simple shapes, just like a circle with triangles around it, like you'd always draw as a kid. So let's just reactivate our circle tool, our ellipse. So you can click either that tool down in your toolbar or O on your keyboard. And I'm also going to click again over here. I'm going to click locking my aspect ratio to make sure it's a perfect circle. And I'm going to change it from 100 to 25. All right. Does anyone remember from last week? I think we covered this. How to get these two perfectly aligned to each other, horizontally and vertically. So if I select both of these, in my position, I have my alignment tools right here. And so I can do align horizontal centers and align vertical centers. Those other strategies will probably work too. It just might be a little bit more moving around. This might just be a little less clicks. Okay. So now I want to make some triangles. Yes. Yeah, I think it kind of depends on like where you're zoomed into. Yeah, I'm zooming in a lot so that it's easy to see on the big screen. Okay. So if we open up our shape tools again, you'll see that there's a polygon one that has the triangle shape. It does not have a keyboard shortcut, so we will have to open it and click here. And you can use this polygon. And if I click here, it'll give me a 100 by 100 triangle. Now, if you want to make a different sided shape, you can change the sides over here in appearance. So right now it's at 3, which makes a triangle. If you go to 4, it's going to make a diamond. Go to 5, 6. I forget what most of these shapes are called, but you can make these multi-sided shapes. There is also this triangle radius right here, this corner radius. That's the same as that square that we were doing last week where we rounded off our corners. So if I change mine to 0.5, I can get like a slightly rounded triangle here. Now you may notice with our triangle that for some reason, I don't know it, I don't work for Figma, they add all of this buffer space down here. I don't know why they do it, but the way that I found that's best to get rid of it is if you double click in your triangle so that you see these striped lines and then click outside of it. Oh, that used to do it. Oh, you have to move it around. That's what it is. Double click, move it around, click outside, and then now the bounding box matches what your triangle actually is. So that's the trick with the triangle. Again, don't know why they do that. So let's go to our layout for our triangle, and I'm going to change this to be 5 and 5. It's going to be a very small triangle, and if I zoom in, I can see that it's pretty small, and it should fit within my space. I can kind of place it on top, and my alignment stuff is seeming a little funky, so I just selected them all and then did the horizontal centers. Okay, so now one triangle doesn't make a sun, as you can imagine. So we're gonna do our same handy dandy trick of doing our Alt or Option, click and drag to duplicate it, and we'll place it somewhere on the bottom. And now there's a few ways that you can just rotate this. So one is you can hover over the corners of the bounding box, which is that blue box that shows up around, and you'll see this little arcy type tool. And if you just click and drag to move it around, it'll start rotating it. You can also specify what rotation angle you want over here under position. And then here are some kind of like quick buttons to do it exact. So in this case, I want it to be pointing down. So this one where it's going to flip it vertically. So top and bottom. This other one flips it left and right. So I'm just going to flip it to top and bottom. And then there I now have the triangle on the bottom. How do I do that? Yep. So if you select your triangle and you click on this flip vertical button in position. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to select both of my triangles, but not anything else. So you can click on one triangle, hold down Command on Mac, Control on Windows, and click the other one. Nope, you hold Shift. Sorry, there's too many design programs out there. So hold one triangle, hold down Shift, and click the other one. And then I'm going to do my Alt or Option, click and drag to get that. And now with these ones selected, I haven't clicked outside. I'm going to click this flip button that's also in my position, and this just rotates them 90 degrees. And then now I can place those right there. And now I'm going to add to my selection, holding down Shift and clicking the top triangle and the bottom triangle. And this one, I am just going to do Command C, Command V to copy paste because it makes sure that it's in the same location. Hover over my bounding box, and I'm going to click and drag to move it so that I'm rotating all of my icons. to be about where they want to be. I did it in the what I think is maybe the quickest way, starting from one triangle. You can also just duplicate each triangle one by one and place them and rotate them. But normally when you're doing something that's pretty symmetrical, selecting multiple things, copy pasting, rotating works pretty well. So now I want to point out something that could become a slight problem. You'll notice that our sun icon is made up of multiple shapes, right? If I select these, I can see all of these shapes that make up my sun icon. With each shape, when you want to change the color or the stroke or things like that, you can do that all through this selection. But if you wanted to do something like a gradient that goes across, it would be very hard to do manually the way that it is because you can't, each of these is a separate shape. So if you apply like a gradient from like the top to the bottom, every shape in here is going to have like top to bottom, top to bottom, top to bottom. So if I were to do like a top red, bottom green, I would be like red, 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 red down to green on this circle. This would be red to green here. This would be red to green here, red to green here, red to green here. Probably not what you're looking for with your design. So what we're going to do with all of our elements selected, and you can just click and drag over them. If you right click, or I think it's Command or Control click on the trackpad, there's this flatten option. Flattening, what that does is it just takes all of these layers and it merges it into one. Really only do this once you're like the layout and the shapes and things are where I want them to be. You can revert it back, but best practice, just get the shape down first. And then when you hit flatten, you'll get this new vector object. And then now this is one object altogether. Sound good? Cool. So let's do our moon icon now. So go over to your other ring that you created. And we're going to do this in a way that I don't know if it's the best way to make a moon. It's a way to do it and it teaches you something new. So that's how we're going to do it. So let's create two circles. So I'm going to press O on my keyboard to activate my ellipse tool. And I'm going to click over here and press O again and click over here. And I now have two really big circles. Both of these I'm going to change so that they're 25 by 25. Okay, we all have two circles. Okay, now I want you to color one of them red and one of them blue. This is just for demonstration purposes. So one of these, you click on it, change the fill, pick any color red. The other one, change the fill, changing my hue slider down here to go to blue and pick any color blue. Cool. So now, as you move like your red or your blue over or under, I want you to make sure that your blue one is on the bottom. So as if you can see mine, if I go over, my red one's underneath my blue one, and I want the blue one to be underneath. So how you can change that is you just go over here in your layers panel. I can see that I've selected my red one. I can see that ellipse 3 is selected, and I can just click and drag and move it up to be on top of ellipse 4, which is my blue. Okay. Now position your red circle to where you like where the blue one's moon looks like. So as I'm moving my red, I'm looking at my blue to be like, okay, what shape of the moon am I looking for? You can go really kind of skinny. If you want more of like a crescent moon, you can go more of like a thicker moon. Just find one that you like. I'm gonna go like so. Yours doesn't have to match mine. I'm gonna select them both. And over here in my design tab, you'll see that I have this 2 selected. And over here, you have these 2 kind of squares that kind of make a larger square that are gray, and this down arrow. And if you click on the down arrow, you'll notice that we have 5 different options here. These are what are called Boolean operations. And so these are things that determine what happens with your 2 elements when they're combined. So if I click on union, both of my circles become one shape, and the shape of where they all kind of meet together with the color of the shape that was on top. I'm going to Command Z to undo that one. If I go to subtract, ooh, it looks like a moon. That's what we're going to be doing. So this does it where it's going to take your bottom shape and it's going to subtract out any overlap that your top shape had from it. Does that make sense? Cool. Intersect, pretty simple. It's going to be where the elements overlap, and it's going to keep the color of the top one. And then our exclude is going to be, it's going to cut out the overlap. So the exact opposite. Now these do work with multiple shapes as well. You don't have to just do two. You can do 3, 4, and make some really complex stuff. You can do like a cloud based on a bunch of different circles, but we're just going to keep it simple. And then our last option was the thing that we did also just go through, which is that flatten. Whenever you do any of these other 4, like subtract, like we're going to do, it does keep it editable. So it makes a group called subtract. And if I open it, I can see both my ellipse 3, which was that red circle, and my ellipse 4, which is my blue circle. So I could still select ellipse 3 and change where the shape is. So I can like make it like this or like this and change my mind. Cool? Okay. So now I'm actually, let's say I really like what this looks like. I'm gonna click on my subtract group. I'm gonna go up and I'm gonna flatten, and you'll notice it's no longer editable. So again, when you're gonna flatten something, make sure you don't want to make further changes to it. You can undo to get back to where it is, but just put that somewhere in your cool. How are we feeling about those? Cool. So now under our shape tools again, they do have a star. We're gonna add some stars to our moon icon so it looks more like night. So I'm gonna click on my star icon, click on it. It does the same thing as that triangle where it has that like extra stuff for whatever reason. And I'm going to just double click inside of it, move it around, click outside so that the box is actually the shape of the object. I'm going to change the width and the height to be 10 each. So you can do that in your layout. And then you can just place your stars wherever you would like. So I did one, I'm just Alt Option clicking and dragging to move some stars around. I might rotate my moon. And then I'm gonna hold down Shift and select all my stars. And then under Appearance, where it says 0 with those corners, this is our rounding corners. Rounded corners are everything in the digital world right now. So kind of add them away. I'm doing 0.5. Basically, the smaller your shape, the smaller that number should be to get the same effect. The bigger the shape, you might need to go a little bit higher to get the same amount of roundness. And I'm just going to adjust this to where I like it, highlight everything or select everything, and flatten it. Okay. Do we all have a sun and a moon icon? Okay. Before we get into some kind of styling of our icon with some gradients, I do want to show you that your shape options are not limited to just what's in here. So what do I mean by that? So I'm going to go to a rectangle. You can also press R on your keyboard, and I'm just going to click and drag to go in here. Now you may have noticed when we were double clicking inside of our triangle or our star to make the box the same size as our shape, if you double click on here, you'll notice these different lines. This means that you're editing the shape itself. And so one example of what I could do is I could take this corner and I could move it and start to make my own custom shape. Before, if I'm not in this kind of like shape edit mode and I do that, I'm just resizing. When I double click inside, we get individual corners that we can change. You can also add these little anchor points. They're normally located halfway on all of these kind of edges. So if I click here, I get another kind of point that I get to play around with. And so I can keep kind of making whatever size shape that I want to be. Make sense? Cool. Okay. So let's go to our sun icon and let's explore some gradients now. So gradient in just the most simple of terms is changing from one color to another color over a little bit of space. And it blends between those colors. So if I select my sun icon under my fill, I'm going to click on this color picker. And instead of this solid color picker, which we've normally been doing, I'm going to switch over to the second option, which is our gradient. Now there's a bunch of different types of gradients that you can see: linear, radial, angular, and diamond. Linear is the most kind of standard one. It's moving from in a line, going from a color to the next color. Radial is going to be going from the inside to the outside in a circle. Angular gets a little funky. I've never found a use for angular. It's this weird line where it starts over here and then it wraps around. I never use it, but maybe you'll find an excuse to use it. And diamond is very similar to the radial, where it starts from the center and goes out, but instead of it being like a circle shape, it's kind of like a diamond where you can see some edges to it. And so for this one, let's do a radial for this. Now you'll notice that we have these two color options right here. And this is basically these different stops. And basically a stop is just wherever you want a color to be the kind of like start and end point for any blend. So if I move this kind of like lighter gray slash white color further to the right, you'll notice it's moving down my line. And that just means that the influence of that white is going to be more and more and more. On the flip side, I could do the same thing with the gray to kind of bring that darker gray in closer. And you'll notice it does give you this nice visual representation of where your gradient is starting and stopping. So this is a pure color up to here, it starts to blend to here, and then it switches to that color. Now you'll notice as I play around with these changes happen down here. If you want to change the color, you just click on that color picker for that stop over here, and you pick whichever color you want it to be. For this one at 0, I'm going to change mine to the hex code FF7637. But you can also play around with your own colors. And press enter, and that gives me this kind of orange color. And then now I'm going to click on my other one, your color picker for the 100%, which is our gray currently, and I'm changing that to FFEE71. These are just colors that I found. They're not special. And when I press enter, I get this yellow. So I get more kind of sun type colors. Now I'm going to quickly switch to linear just to show you something, but you don't need to. You can also change the rotation of your gradient, so it doesn't have to be for linear, it doesn't have to be top to bottom. If you hover over the endpoint of your linear gradient and you just drag it over, you can get a gradient that goes diagonal, you can keep going, can do whatever you want. You can also, if you select the stops, you can expand it, so it's like further out, it's just making it seem more off of your shape. It's gonna be less close, less impactful, and you could just bring it in for even more. So this is the size of your gradient, and this is where on the size of your gradient these are located. Let's switch back to radial, and I messed mine up a little bit, so I'm just gonna readjust that. Now you're not limited to just 2 colors in any of these gradients. You can click on the plus icon to add a stop, and it'll add it at 50%, usually in between, and it'll pick the color that it thinks is the blend of those two. So your gradient is not going to change by that much, but you can change it to, let's say, like 35%, and then you can change the color here, and you're adding on additional layers to your gradient. So if you wanted, for some reason, your sun to have a little bit of blue in it, you could do that. Doesn't really make sense, but so we're going to work on this project section. So I'm just going to move out, zoom out, and I put some placeholder images, these kind of rectangles to kind of show this is where I want these different cards for my portfolio website to be that shows each project that I'm including. So let's do this. Let's create a rectangle on top of this rectangle. So use your R key on your keyboard or use your rectangle and just click and drag to move it to about where it's going to be. You can also use that same rectangle that I put in there, but I'm just keeping mine separate. And so we don't get confused, let's change our color right away. We're going to change it to one of the color styles that I saved in this starting file. Does anyone remember how to select the color style for the fill from last week? Yep, so you're under fill. We gotta do something here. Yes. So there's four kind of square icon, and you'll notice that all of these color styles that I've saved into this starting file are here. I'm going to pick secondary for this one. You'll notice that these terms, I just copied the exact thing that they had from Real-Time Colors, that one website that I showed you where we just press spacebar till we get colors that we liked. So I just copied them exactly. And then I am going to change my appearance to have those rounded corners. I'm just going to change it to 25. And we get these nice rounded corners for our background. Okay, so now we're going to learn a little bit about this concept of masking. So masking is something that is pretty popular in design programs like Figma and Photoshop and stuff. It's basically how you can have an image or a pattern show up inside of text, show up inside of your custom shapes or stuff that you build. And basically, our use case here is I want an image, like a thumbnail of this project, to show up on this card on the top. Now, you might think, oh, I can just easily place in an image. But if we're doing our rounded corners, I don't want that image to have sharp corners in the top left and right. So I want to use a more of a custom image with a shape. So I am going to create another rectangle, and this time I'll give you the exact layout. So we're going to do a 430 width rectangle by a 190 height. So this is going to be where our thumbnail image is going to be in. But I want to round my corners. Does anyone remember how you round specific corners? So far, we've just been rounding everything. Does anyone remember the button? Yes. Yes. Yep, the square one on the side here in our appearance, you click on it and you get your individual corners. So now you can change just the top left and the top right to be 25. Okay, now I don't have images for us to use, so let's use Unsplash again from last week. So if you were here last week and you did the plugins, you just right click anywhere and under plugins, and you should see Unsplash. If you didn't have that one from last week, you can do manage plugins and search it up. So just click on Unsplash and find whatever image you want to do. I'm just going to click on abstract and find some patterny type image. Maybe let's do this one. You can use whatever image that you want. Okay. Now, what I want to do is I want for this image to fit in this shape. So how you do that is you make sure that your image is located on top of your shape. Now you want to select both your image and that shape. It's a little hard to do when you have something covering it, but over here in your layers panel, if you hover over different elements, you'll see the highlight of that shape. And so I know that this rectangle 3 is that shape that I'm using. So I'm just going to hold down Shift and click on there to select both. I'm going to right click and control click, and you'll notice there's this use as mask option. And if I click there, my image and my rectangle are now put in what's called a mask group, where the rectangle is the shape of the mask and my image is the content. Now, the reason that it's super important to make sure that the image is on top of the shape is if it's the opposite's going to happen, where your image is going to be the shape that's used for the mask and your rectangle is going to be the content. Similar to those Boolean operations that we were just doing, this is still editable. We can still make changes. So if I select my image, for example, I can still resize it and reposition it within my mask group so that I can get it exactly where I want it to be. And you'll notice that if I go where the edge of my image is within my shape, it's just going to show whatever's there. But as I go up, you'll notice those rounded corners from my shape start to cut some stuff out of our image. Yes.
So on this auto clip, so it's like as soon as I clicked on to the
And you can still move it around and stuff? Like, can you still move it around and change? Cool. Yeah. Happy for you. Yeah. 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 That's great. All right. And now again, if you want to, you can flatten this if this is exactly where you want it to be, or you can click on your mask group over here, and I'm just going to click and drag it so it's on top of my card. I'm going to go into my project section and find where my placeholder one is. It's this project one placeholder, and I'm just going to delete it. If you're using that gray rectangle as your background, you don't have to delete it, but because I'm using something else, I just want to get that out so it's a little bit easier to see what we're actually doing. Cool. We all have something that looks like this. Nice. So I'll give you a little bit of a challenge with some things, and I will write what your challenge is here so that as you work on it, you don't lose it. So what I want you to do is I want you to add a project title to this card using the H3 text style. I want you to also make a button where it's 200 pixels by 50 pixels with 25 pixel rounded corners and the accent color style. And lastly, and these are going to be added on top right here. So you should be able to see them on your card. And then lastly, for the card itself, I want you to add a drop shadow effect with the following settings. So X is going to be 4, Y is 4, blur is also 4, and then your color is going to be secondary with some movement. So pick the secondary one, unlink it, and then pick a slightly different color. I'll write that. And then a 30% opacity. Okay. So I will give you the next 5 minutes to work on this. No worries if you get stuck. I will go through it all. All right. I'm gonna go through how to do all of these. So to add my project tile or title, I'm going to click on the T icon in my toolbar, or you can press T on your keyboard, and I'm going to click and write some sort of a title for my project. I'm just going to do project title. I'm going to click outside of there so that whatever changes I make apply to all of the text within my text block. I'm going to apply the H3 text style by going to my typography panel, clicking on my 4 square, whatever this is, and find where it says H3. I'm going to click on that. And I'm just going to place this into a part on here. You can change the color if you would like to. Now for my button, I'm going to use a rectangle. So activate with R or this toolbar, I'm going to click. I'm just going to manually change my numbers for the size. So 200 by 50. And then I'm going to change all of my rounded corners to 25. And now I get this kind of pill shape. And then under fill, I'm going to click on this 4 square menu and click accent. So it says other purple. I'm placing it just somewhere here. I'm gonna, oh, nope, that can stay. So hopefully you have something like this already. So the drop shadow, this was kind of the challenge as one of the later things we did. So I'm gonna select my rectangle 2 is what mine is named, my kind of secondary color one here. I'm going to click on the plus for my effects. I have drop shadow. I want to change the position X to 4 so that it moves slightly to the right. I have Y at 4 already. I have my blur at 4 already. And then for the color, I'm just going to click here. And then I'm going to do my color picker actually. So I clicked here to get to my drop shadow color. Right here, I can use this eyedropper tool and I can just click over to sample a different color and it automatically selects that color. I'm going to make it slightly lighter, so that's maybe not so harsh. And then instead of it being this 100% opacity, I'm changing it to, I said 30. And so now we got a pretty faint, but still somewhat noticeable kind of shadowy effect in that same color. Maybe I don't like that color and I want to see it a little bit darker. I can kind of change that. And now I have this kind of like illusion of depth on a flat screen. Let's move on to making some reusable design components on our site. So I'm gonna create a new page so that we can remove all of this distraction of what we've been doing. I'm gonna create a new page. You can leave it as page 2. This is where we're gonna learn about components and instances and variants of stuff. So I am going to create a basic circle. Okay. So use the circle. It's going to be, let's say, instead of 100 by 100, I'm going to do 150 by 150. And I am going to set the fill to my primary color. So it's this kind of bright blue. So Figma allows us to create these things called components. And these are going to be any sort of design asset that you anticipating using multiple times throughout your design. As you're designing websites and apps, you're going to have multiple screens, and you're probably going to have some element that is consistent throughout all of them or some of them, including like navigation menus. This could be maybe like your buttons if you want them to be very specific. And that's when we're going to use components. So to make any element a component in Figma, you go with it selected up to where we were playing with our Boolean operations. And you'll notice that there's this 4 diamonds within a diamond button. And this creates what's called a component. Now it doesn't look like much has changed, except for our selection thing is now purple. The text is purple. It's purple over here. This is just meaning that this is a component. So now once I've created my component and I want to use it somewhere else, I can go to my Assets tab on the left. So over by where it's File, there's Pages. If you go to Assets, if you have libraries, if you have like a brand, you might make a library that has a bunch of components that you can use across design files. Right now, you just have this one. So you should see under here this created in this file. And if you click in there, you'll see you have your ellipse 1. So now I can just click and drag and move it and drop it somewhere else. So this gets super helpful when, let's say you have like a logo, when you have some consistent styling, it's just easy to just drag and drop it. You don't have to keep recreating things. Now, you'll notice there's a little bit of a difference as you select each of these elements. Over here, when I have the main component selected, it says I have all of these options. When I have this one selected, I only have this option to jump to the main component. So this is what is called an instance, okay? So I'll just write those up here. This is a component, and this is an instance. Now, what's really cool about components and instances is that when you make a change to a component, it changes all of the instances that you've used. So if I click on my component, ellipse 1, and let's say I unlink primary here, and I click style and I change it to secondary, my instance changes to secondary as well. So this is like your main version where you're going to make your edits that apply to every one that you've dragged and dropped somewhere else. Now, let's say you go here to this instance and it is under here, your 3-dot menu. So if you select your instance, you have your 3-dot menu, you'll notice that there's this detach instance. So if I click on that, you'll notice I now get other options up here. It goes back to blue. What this does is it breaks that link between the two of them. And so now if I go to my component and I change back to primary, it doesn't impact this instance because I broke that link. Does that make sense? Cool. Now there's also other ways that you can just break the link as well. So if I go to my instance, I've created a new instance, and let's say I go and I start changing things. Like let's say I go and I change it to secondary. Now when I go to my main component and I change it, let's say to background, it's not gonna push those changes to the instance. And that's because what Figma's doing is it says, hey, you changed this instance from the main version, so you want it to be different. So we're not gonna keep them the same. Although you'll notice that you can still jump to them. So you can either fully detach or you can kind of just detach some of the changes that you want to make. Okay, make sense? So let's start to see this in a little bit more of like a practical action. So I'm gonna go to File, and go back to my website page. Now I have my kind of project card right here. And let's say this is something, you'll notice I have 5 blank spots for other projects. So this is going to be something that I'm going to want to do multiple different versions of. And so this is where components can be very helpful as well. So I'm going to select all of the things that make up my project card. So it should be your button, it should be your text, a mask group, and then your background. I'm going to Command G. You can Control G if you're on Windows to make it into a group. And I'm going to double click in here and just name this project card. I want to make this a component so I can easily use it again and again. And so I'm going to click over here into my create component. And this is after I've made my group. I have it selected and I create my component. And now you might have to go back to go to your website page. And then now you have your project card that you can just drag and drop over here. So I selected all of the elements that make up my project card, which was 2 rectangles, my text, and my mask group. I grouped them all together using Command G. With the group selected, I went over here in my properties, and you should see the diamond with 4 diamonds within it. Once I've done that, it's made as a component, which you get all of these options then. And then now to just use that component somewhere else, you go to your assets. There should be created in this file. It should be on the website page, and then you should have your project card. Now, even when I'm designing, I probably don't want to have this same card 6 times on the page. It's gonna look kind of basic and boring. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move my card off of my page, off of my frame. So we're working over here. Now, when you've created components, you can create different variants of those components. This is particularly helpful when we get to animating and prototyping. So if you want to, for example, simulate the effect of hovering over a button changes its color, or hovering over a link shows an underline on the text, this is how you would do it, is using these variants. So to create a variant, which we're going to do one of our project card, you go over here to where it says project card, and then you'll see this icon, which is a diamond with a plus in the middle. And if I click that, you'll notice that I get an exact duplicate. But this is an exact duplicate that we can then change and switch between. So what I want to do is I want to replace, let's say, just for show, the image, different text, a different background, and a different piece of our button color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run Unsplash again. So I right-clicked, I go to Plugins, and I'm going to go to Unsplash. I'm going to find a different picture. So I'm going to find another abstract one. Let's say this one. And I'm just going to drag it onto my file. Now, a little trick that I want to show you that relates to our mask groups. So you'll notice in my, where it says variant 2, this is my variant that I'm editing. I have my mask group here. And this is that same kind of custom shape with a different image inside. If I want this other image to be that image here, I can just click and drag and move my image to be within my mask group. You just have to make sure that you see a little bit of indentation in that white line, because that means you're going inside of something. And when I release it, you'll now see my image is perfectly in that mask group. All right, so I have my different image in my variant mask group. I can just click a few times to go in to my project title. You can also find it in your layers panel under project card, variant, project title. I'm just going to name this something different just for show. New project title, let's say. I'm going to change my background. So instead of it being secondary, let's just do, let's say primary. And I'm going to change my button instead of accent. Let's do secondary this time. You don't have to do those specific edits. Just make sure that you have your main project card looks like something, and then you have a variant that looks like something else. Now, if you select where it says default in your layers panel, this is going to be your kind of initial main component. So it should say default in your layers panel. Going over here in our top right, it'll say project card and it says property and then it says default. This is where you can assign a name for what you're changing about each thing. So common use cases of this, your property name might be state, for example. And you might have a state for it's just on the page. You might have a hover state. You might have a click state. You might have these different things that a user could do with this element, and you want to change the styling for each. So where it says property one, you can just click on it and name it something. So I'm just going to name this project. So this would be an example of like I want to switch between my different projects of what I have on my portfolio site. And where it says default, that's where you can change the value. So I'm going to change this to let's say like num1 for number one. You can do project one, you can do whatever the name of the project. And then if I click on where it says variant 2 in my layers panel, you'll notice that I do have my project here as well. That's going to be our property. And I can change it from variant 2 to like num2, for example. This is just some naming stuff so that you know what's going on. This doesn't impact anything. This is just organization. Okay? So now what I'm going to do is go to my assets, and you're created in this file website. We see our project card. If you hover over it, you'll notice that there's this 2 option. This just means that there's variants in here. So it means that there's more than one version or different style that you can use with this element. So if I drag and drop this to create an instance, I will see over here that I have my property of project and my num1 is the value. This is a dropdown where I can now change from num1 to num2, and it'll just change this instance to the variant that I select. Now, where this is really helpful in a real world scenario is if you want to change the color of a button when you hover over something, you can prototype that to say, hey, when you're hovering over it in the prototype, it changes color. It can also be good for image galleries or sliders. If you want it to kind of rotate something and it changes the image based on something. I have one last thing that we're going to go through today. We'll get a lot of practice with components and variants next week. We'll also do the same thing like this week where I have a starting file for you. We're going to be playing around with a lot of stuff. I've like put a ton of components in it that we can play around with. But let's get on to our last topic, which is a little bit more on responsive design. So I'm just going to move my icons out of the way and I'm going to deal with these kind of navigation links and our hero text up here. So as I mentioned at the beginning, responsive design is the concept of making your design accessible to different screen types. Mainly it's based on the screen width. So you have your desktop monitor, which might be really wide, your laptop monitor, which is a little bit less wide. You have tablets, which depending on its orientation, can be similar or smaller. Your phone can be very small. And this is designed, as we can tell by clicking on where it says home, with that desktop frame preset that we used last week, where the width is 1440. Now, if I were to try to view this mocked up website on my phone, which width is probably between like 250 and 350, so much of this content's going to be cut off. So we're going to use some tools within Figma to make this design responsive. So if I click on home, you'll notice that as I start to kind of go and expand or decrease my width, that different elements are doing different things right here. And so this is kind of like what we're going to start doing is kind of cleaning this up, making it a little bit easier. There will be some manual effort. You will probably want to have one design flow for the website, one for an app, make them separate because you're still going to have to rearrange some things that Figma is not yet able to do with AI, which also I found out the AI stuff in Figma can't use on the education plan. So found that out after class last week. So we're going to just use the tools that are available to us. So we're going to start off with this text right here. Basically what I want to happen, instead of this text being clipped so I can't see anything, I want it to start kind of indenting, entering, expanding. Okay. So how we do that is through auto layouts and constraints. We did a bit about constraints last week, but now we're going to explore them a little bit more. So what I want you to do is select this group. So if you click just anywhere kind of in this text, you should see this selection box that has both this kind of title and then this kind of subtitle. Now, over here in our design panel is where we're going to find our tools that we're looking for. The first thing that we're going to do is our auto layout. The name kind of tells you where it's going to be. It's under the layout panel, but it's this button right here. And this allows you to toggle an auto layout, which determines how new elements and existing elements are laid out with each other. So if I turn off auto layout, you'll notice I do have some of these options all here, but when I toggle it on, I get a bunch more. So this first kind of set of things here is going to be what sort of direction do you want your elements to be laid out in? Freeform is going to be when you don't have an auto layout. It's going to be the thing you're manually placing everything where you want it to be. Horizontal, which is over here, is if you want things to be left to right going. So if I switch to that, you'll notice my text goes over here. Vertical is top to bottom. That's probably what we're going to want here. And then there is this grid, which is in beta, which can do both at the same time. I haven't played around with it. I would probably wait for it to get out of beta before you go too crazy with it. So I'm gonna just go back to vertical. And under our width, you may have noticed before with different elements that the width didn't have this drop down, but with an auto layout selected, it does. So you get some options for what width you want for your box. So a fixed width is going to be you are setting a specific size, and that's the size of your box. Hug contents, you'll notice, is going to move my selection box to be whatever the width that the text or the elements need. So it's just going to kind of scrunch them in. There is also adding minimum widths and maximum widths. We won't explore that in this, but this is going to be helpful for as you're resizing or redesigning. If you're like, I don't want this image to go below a certain width because it's going to look like crap, you can add that here. Also, if you don't want something to go above a certain width, you can add minimum or maximum widths here. We're going to leave the fixed width and we're going to set it, if it did change, if you're playing around, it was at 1340. Now we can do the same stuff with our height. So fixed height is going to be you're determining the height of the size. You can do hug contents. Let's change it to that. It's not going to change anything because by default it kind of does that. But this just makes sure that the height will dynamically change as we add more elements or we remove stuff or things like that. We also do have our locked aspect ratio again, if you need to make sure that it stays the same size proportionally. And then we have our alignment options in here. And so you can change your alignment options depending on how you want these elements to be aligned within the auto layout. So I'm going to keep mine at top left, but if you wanted, for example, everything to start from the top and it goes down through the center, you can do that. If let's say you want to have like a bigger box, but not as many elements in it, you can like center it perfectly and there'll be space around, but we can just leave it for the top left. Over here, we're going to have what's called vertical gap. So this is going to be how much space do you want between these different objects. So if I start to increase this, it's going to start increasing a little bit of a gap between my elements in my auto layout. Or you can go negative and have them overlap. This is going to be your horizontal padding. So padding is going to be any space that you want in between your selection box and the actual elements. So if I start to increase this, you'll notice that it starts getting squeezed both from the left and from the right. And then the same thing can happen with your vertical padding if you want there to be more space here. Additionally, just like your rounded corners, you can decide to do these all individually. Okay, now if you double click inside of here and select, let's say, the title, you'll notice that you still get some different layout options here as well. So these change also for the individual elements within an auto layout. So this first one is still going to be your kind of width and height settings. So do you want the box around our text to be an auto width? Do you want it to be an auto height? Do you want it to be a fixed size? And we can just do auto width. You can also change the boxes for these individual elements. And we're going to change these slightly because they're a little bit different. So under width, you'll notice that we have this new one called fill container. So what fill container does is it's now going to say, hey, whatever the size of that auto layout for the whole group is, that's going to be the size for this element. And as you expand or decrease, it'll change it for here too. And then we can leave our hug contents for the height. So let's see how that's doing. So if I click on home and I start to go like this, you'll notice it doesn't really do anything yet. So we still got some work to do, but we've set it up for success. Okay, I'm going to click back on my group, and the constraints, which are the other thing that I was talking about, are right here. So your constraints are basically telling Figma what you want this element to do when the screen is resized, where you want it to be oriented. So this is right now at top and at left. What this means is that for this group, if I want to change its size, this will still have the same distance between the top and this element. So if I were to, let's say, expand from the bottom, you'll notice it doesn't move, which is good. If I expand from the top, it's going to move with the top. And that's because I set it to top. So it's always going to have that same distance between the top and the bottom, or just from the top, not the bottom. Sorry. Same thing with left and right. So right now it's at left. So if I were to expand to the right, it doesn't change. If I expand to the left, it moves with the left. Okay. Now over here, there's a couple of different ways that you can select which ones you want to do. You can use this little picture to change them and select top, bottom, middle, center, all these things, or you can use these drop downs. The one thing to note is the drop downs do have one additional setting. So if I open up left, you'll notice that I have left and right as an option. You can't select left and right over here. So I'm going to set it to left and right. So now what this is going to do for my element, this group, is it's going to say, hey, keep the same distance between the left part of the frame and this group and the right part of this frame and the group. So now, as I start to resize my screen, you'll notice that that text does wrap as I start to resize. Yeah, so if you click on the group, and then over here where it says, it should maybe says left, it'll say left and right. And for this individual element down here, the reason why that one's not wrapping is because we have it set to hug the contents. So if I change this then to fill container and I start to do it, it's now going to wrap. That was all I had to go through today. And so next week we will start with a new starting file. It'll be an app instead of a website, so you can kind of play around with that. And we'll do some animation, some prototyping, make it really fun.